Hello, my name is Piminata, and this is the episode on Viewpoint. Today I wanted to try to brainstorm on a very important concept that we already know, which is should Christians pay tax? Is it relevant for Christians to pay tax? So I know that this is a very controversial subject. Many people discuss it. That's because two worlds are trying to battle each other. The secular world, or the non-Christian world, as it seems, and also the Christian world. So this matter is quite something that both parties bring something on board in the arguments that they do formulate. Since I'm not somebody who is a lawyer or a legalist, I don't think I'll be making my argument on a legal basis. But I think just biblical understanding and common sense can prevail and provide us with a more elaborate understanding to what is there a need for Christians to pay tax or not. So on the roadmap, I'll be breaking it down first into the representation, the Christian dilemma, balance of power, mismanagement, attraction of value, and then we see the position of God, and I'll leave it off with any advice that needs to be. On the non-Christian side, the argument is that once you live in a place, or you live in a state, you should be able to contribute to the needs of the state. So since you're using the infrastructure, since you're using the resources, you should be able to provide your end of the bargain. And that is the argument that is made. Also, accountability. Organizations, no matter who they are, should be able to, once they are living in a society, should be able to account for the resources that they have. And essentially, the final aspect will be the idea of fairness. So there should be fairness in the fact that we are all trying to contribute our quota to a society, and you should be able to give us your end of this. So that is the argument from the non-Christian world. Well, the Christian side, well, to be able to establish this argument, we have to first be able to build up the definitions of everything. And I'm not going to go into a dictionary definition. I'm just going to go into just what we know to be. Now, two institutions are battling this out, which is the government and the church. Okay. And what do we understand by what a government should be? A government should be an entity that is representing the people. And so it's the collective power of the people. In a democratic system, it is the collective power of the people in which they elect their leader. While in other forms of government, it's just whoever also states itself to represent the people is the government. So in a monarchy, an individual represents the government, or a family or a group of individuals represents the government. In socialism, a group of people who have at least gotten a set of leverage in the society, gather themselves, and they are the government. Different sort of governments exist. By the end of the day, they represent a group of people. And therefore, if your government makes war on another country, it doesn't matter whether you guys voted or not. He has represented you, and therefore the consequences would end up coming back to you. And we've seen that in the story of Jesus, in which it says, if a king realizes that he cannot win a war, he then begins to negotiate, because you are representing the society that you are. So that's the definition for the government. Now let's come to the church. Well, the church could be seen as the institution that formed the mediation between God and his people. And so in Ephesians, it says, he has given all things to the church, the fullness of him that fulfilleth all things, all in all. That filleth all things, all in all. So the church is trying to portray a representative body of Christ where his will is done on the earth. Of course, individuals within the church also have their responsibility, and based on their relationship with God, are able to enact certain rules of God. But the collective power of all the people of God comes in the mechanism of the church, which represents God. Now, this is the definition, and this is the stage where we build the case for these two parties, where we have the government on one side and we have the church. Now, what makes this very interesting as a study is that Jesus Christ made an audacious statement, which is different from the way religions are built. Okay, so if you're a Buddhist, your idea is to, okay, maybe you sort of reach your nirvana, you are trying to get yourself off from suffering and all that. It's quite a personal sort of tone to it. The Hindus will have this sort of, okay, worshiping your gods, different kinds of god. It's that kind of personal tone to it. Well, some religions have this kind of kingdom mentality. For example, Islam claims itself to have this kingdom tone to it. Jesus Christ brings a different perspective in the story of religions, in which he believes he is a king, and then his kingdom is not of this world and is somewhere, and then he's on earth to enact a certain role based on the perspective of his kingdom. This is a very bold claim. This is not even wishing that one day you'll be in heaven. He claims that he comes from heaven. He claims that he's able to get people to heaven. He claims that he's been living there for years and he just came down, and he has the right to even have mansions where he can get people inside. He said, in my father's house are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you. That statement doesn't look like a guess game that we have religions built upon. Okay, we hope one day this is true. This one is like the person believes it is true. And in that audacious statement, he has separated some, that there seems to be an earthly world and a kingdom that he represents. He said earthly kings speak of earthly things, and then heavenly kings speak of heavenly things. And that's John chapter 3. In brainstorming this idea, puts the Christian in a very strange dilemma, because the Christian is caught up in a world where he is a citizen of a state. He has his passport, he has his identity, he has his culture, he has his people. But in affiliating himself with this Jesus person, he has then become a representative citizen of another country. We see this dilemma in the history of Japan, where 1603, 1863, we see this dilemma within the Japanese community. And the government is trying to have their own Japanese identity, but then comes the Christians. And multiplying the case is the fact that the Christians themselves are seen to be affiliated with the Western society or the Western community. And so the Christians over time in Japan have to prove their affiliation and their commitment towards the Japanese community, and the end legacy on to now. That the Christians are caught in a dilemma in which they are a member of a state, and then they are also a member of a certain kingdom that believes that it is sovereign, and that is the kingdom of God. This dilemma is what puts the stage into this tax system, because a tax is the claim of a king or representative body asking its citizens to pay things towards him. And so it's not surprising to have this argument in which the non-Christian world appeals to the Christian world that you guys need to contribute something. And then the Christian world says, no, we are not. And several countries have been able to formulate these arguments and find a balance between them. They may not have a perfect way of building it, but they've been able to get something working. I don't want to stretch myself so much into the concept of a church and a state, the difference between the church and the state, since this, although people think it works, doesn't really complete the story. Now, after really establishing the case for the representation, let me go into the aspect of attraction of value. Once you've been able to have everybody saying, oh, I represent a group of people, then there is the case of attraction of value. Whoever represents attracts value. So if you have the government actually attracts value. So all the resources of a state goes through the government. And in the case of the church, since they surprisingly represent the will of the people of God and God, sort of an interface that is built, they attract value. It's the reason why several people on Sunday will go and put their resources onto the coffers of a church. And then several people at the toll booth or at the several counters that we have will put their value to the government, because the government will take their resources and be able to represent them and make good use of it. And then we have the church also having the resources being collected by the church, so the people will give their resources to the church. So whatever happens, once you tend to represent a value, you would, at the end of the day, attract value. And that can make you very powerful. So we see historically the church ends up being very powerful until perhaps the Reformation and other instances where there has been some breakdown of the church structure in order to make it less powerful than it is. But whatever case it is, the church, by the case of attraction of value, ends up being powerful. Then comes the balance of power. So the balance of power then comes in where it's like the government then looks at the church as a representative body and says, you guys shouldn't be this powerful. And the church then looks at the government and says, you guys shouldn't be too powerful. And so there's this political system and the balance of power that is this dynamic balance of power that is playing in between the church. Let's look at the case of mismanagement. The reason why this argument comes on is because both parties can be accused of both help and both mismanagement. Now remember, the definitions are looking at the ideal versions of the churches and the government. The government at the ideal level are supposed to represent the body, the will of the people, build for them rules, build for them electricity, build for them stuff. Well, certain parts of government have been able to do that. And looking at the church, it's supposed to be able to use the resources of the church very well, take care of the widows, do this. But at the end of the day, the most important part of the church is that it is responsible for the spiritual needs of the people. And you can hear several pastors making this appeal that we are not the ones to build your roads for you, but we are the ones to look at the spiritual side, which is to take care of your spiritual guidance. Well, that is their claim. But nonetheless, the government has been able to do certain things for its people, and the church has been able to do certain things for its people. Let's take a case scenario in the Republic of Ghana, where the church is very revered. The church as an institution is very revered and forms a part of the social system. Why? Because in the history of the Republic of Ghana, the church has played a role in, first of all, the peace system that the country as a whole enjoys. The education system itself has benefited from the church, leveraging the backbone of the Western influence. But most importantly, the church taking its full role as being the one to take the initiative of building schools. You cannot mention a high school in Ghana, a good high school in Ghana, which does not have a Christian history. And even the medical service is the reason why there is this respect in Ghana between the government and the churches. The churches are seen as more of a privileged role, and most of the important decisions are not taken without the consent of the church. For example, in the 2020 pandemic, the church was called up, in which the decision was between the partnership between the government and the church. This is a very unique position which is not seen in other countries and not seen in other societies. And therefore, there's this very unique use case that happens in Ghana between the church and the government. But nonetheless, most of them are accused of mismanagement. There's a case of several accusations of pastors misusing the resources. And this sort of has an eyebrow raised and raises this question in which there's a suspicion between the non-Christian world looking at the church and it's like, you guys are so powerful, we need some of your resources. And the church saying that, no. So this argument will forever be there. But why don't I believe that churches should be taxed? It's because money as a thing is a very important weapon. I remember years ago there was this Indian movie in which the Indians were trying to negotiate for their independence, and one of the movie was a long time ago. I've forgotten the title. And whenever the Indian parties would stand up and try to negotiate with the British party, the British government, the British will raise up the tax and say, increase 25%, increase 20%. Well, it showed me that money as a system is not just something to build a society, but it is used as a leverage. And one thing that you don't want is when an organization is blackmailed by another organization or another party, that unless you kowtow to my viewpoints, I can be able to raise the tax. I can be able to raise the value. And that has been the appeal of the church, that, okay, you can tax us. Our members can be able to go into your world and then you can tax them. But we as an institution cannot be able to be taxed because a taxation system can be used as a blackmailing tool and as a leverage in making us bow down to your viewpoint, even when we don't agree with it. And that has been why taxes have been as like, this is not something you touch, because taxes are backed by law and laws are very powerful. And once you touch something that is very important as money and you touch it, everybody must bow to it. And you cannot have the church having to go into the dilemma of deciding on its values and paying your tax. So this is why, no matter how the mismanagement level goes, you cannot just touch the money, because whoever controls your monetary system controls you. And the church has appealed that does not work for them. So that is the argument that I think that's the primary argument the church will make in this instance. It's like, once we are under your taxation system, we are under your rule, and we cannot bow to this. Well, this is just the common sense framework that we are building on. But let's look at the position. Now, in the biblical stage, it's an interesting matter because there are two books that could offer us a definition. First is the scholarly book of Ezra, and it is the book that accounts for the history of the Messiah to the Jews, the book of Matthew. And we are looking at the book of Matthew in a very unique case, because the book of Matthew is the book of Matthew. Both books look at the 24th versions. For example, in Ezra chapter 7, the 24th side looks at the taxation system. And in Matthew chapter 17, verse 24, is what looks at Jesus encountering the taxation system. But contrary to what most Christians believe, Jesus is not appreciative of this viewpoint. In fact, in the latter part, he says, in order not to offend them, because he does that reluctantly in having to pay the tax, because he doesn't believe that he deserves to be taxed for his side of the game, his institution, since he believes that he should be able to be separated from this. Also, he looks at a cultural context in which he says, no, if you are a citizen of a place, you do not need to pay a tax. If you are outside the country, you should. Now, the taxation system of the world doesn't work that way. It doesn't work where the outside parties pay tax, right? Now, citizens of a country now pay tax, and the foreigners don't pay to the country. So, but Jesus was looking at a cultural element in which at that time, foreign states were supposed to pay tax. For example, Rome could ask tax from different people rather than the citizens of Rome even paying. And we realize that Jesus does that reluctantly. But then the Old Testament presents the book of Ezra, where it is not even Jesus trying to be reluctant about it. It is the God of the Bible not very appreciative of this, and throwing down a warning and a case and saying that, no, you don't try to do this to my temple. And then we realize that one of the biggest privilege that is given is that tax exemptions are the ways by which the God of heaven is favored. So you don't try to tax my people, you don't try to tax my temple, and you don't. It's like the 10th commandment, or it's like the 11th commandment to the 10th commandment. Don't touch my temple. And Cyrus, in that sort of nice way of looking at Cyrus and all that, is looking at all these people and saying one of the ways they were able to favor the church was to be able to look at the church and say, you know what, you don't touch them. And the Americans have been able to build a very great system in which they are able to separate the religious side, which is the Christian world, looking at them with a religious lens, and they're able to find a way to say, okay, these guys can be looked at and say, okay, they are not taxed. And the only way by which the church can be able to contribute to the state system is where the members of the church are going there to be able to contribute their quota to their citizenship, because they have this dilemma of being citizen of heaven and on earth. Well, this is the position of the Bible, and that's where I will stand to, that the God of the Bible has never appreciated the taxation system being leveraged on his people and upon his temple. But practically, in the way that this could be implemented is when members that are citizens of the body of Christ need to be taxed, but the institution of the church itself cannot be taxed. This is the position as a Christian, and this is my viewpoint.